Um, well, that was made 30-something years ago, 33 years ago, or something like that. And since then, of course, I've made friends with Mel, who's the godfather of my son, and Bancroft was the godmother of my daughter. And I talk to him, you know, most days. So I'm going to talk about filmmaking and talk about what you saw in that film. What happened with it was that essentially, in making that film, it was of course a profile of Mel Brooks. But in doing so, we also made a kind of trying to make a film which was both serious and funny at the same time, and captured his personality. And quite a lot of it was calculated. So we would sit in LA and we would have lunch, and then we'd think, well, what will the next scene be? So for instance, you saw at the beginning of that film, for instance, the Bentley was some wealthy person I happened to know owned a Bentley, and I decided the opening sequence should begin, and you'd imagine you were going to find Mel Brooks in the Bentley. In fact, you found him in that motorbike behind the Bentley. Then, of course, I would think, well, what happens after that? You'd think, what would happen next? And I thought, right, well, you'll find him in his office, but no, you're going to have a motorbike going through the corridor into the office. And these were all things I had to kind of get permission from the studio. And then you see at the end that woman, Sherry Lansing, was in fact the head of the studio. And so it was a sort of collusion between me and Mel as to how the film would be made. So each of those sequences would sort of come out, we'd work it out beforehand, just in a rather relaxed way, and we'd go ahead and make the sequences. It was a great pleasure to make, just as much fun as that, and every day, you know, he didn't want to leave, so we carried on until we finally got an ending in the broom cupboard. So I'm going to show you a few clips, and one of the things about all these films is that there has to be trust between the people, the subject and the maker, in my view, and that's very, very important. Particularly even today, in a world in which more and more people are asked to do things and they think, well, why should I be bothered? And also, when you're telling a story, people are asked the same questions again and again. So somehow or other, trying to get them to answer those questions with the kind of conviction and honesty that you really need, they need to trust you to do that. They need to be engaged with you to do that. I'm going to show you, the first clip I'm going to show you, and when we come, I'm just telling them over there, when we come to the titles of the sequence, well actually no, I'll tell you when to, so you've got your torch there.
Let's see if it's working.
Alright, don't worry, I'll clap when it's to be finished, I'll start talking. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a film made in 1974, a long, long time ago. Even much earlier even than this, that is nearly 40 years ago. This is a film about David Bowie called Cracked Actor, which has been on at this festival. Some of you will have seen it. And I'm going to show you the opening sequence of this. As I say, you saw the sort of provocative opening of that Mel Brooks film where he's viewing his thing, and then the journey into the studio. So something that will capture your attention, because television is a bit like that. You know, with movies you have to leave with a good feeling. On television, you have to feel you want to carry on, and especially as often arts programs are quite late in the evening. So this is a film. I was making a short film a bit early in my career, and I got a phone call from the manager of David Bowie. He said, David has seen one of your films, he liked it. I hadn't made more than one or two, as it happens. He wonders if you'd like to make a film about him. So I went to New York, I met him, and we got on, and I told him what I had in mind. I was originally going to call this film The Collector because of all the different ideas and images he captured and then performed and played, but eventually I decided to call it Cracked Actor. And this is the opening sequence, and I'll show it you now, and we could run that first one of Cracked Actor David Bowie, if we can. We'll take the lights down and we'll show you this.
You get tired of being outrageous, if that gets anything commonplace at all. If you describe yourself as ordinary, what adjective would you use?
He was actually taking cocaine, and his diet was more or less milk and cocaine at that time. And the film really uses his work and the songs to tell the story of how he went to Los Angeles to dispense with these characters, to get them out of his system, and to move on in his life. And of course you've seen recently just how strange he is. He's kind of still an elusive man. He just brought out an album, won a big award, but has made no appearance in public, despite the fact that suddenly this is the year of Bowie again, and he's come back. Yeah. The next clip I'm going to show you it's really about, again, the confidence of people, and this is the film which is also part of the festival. It's with Orson Welles, and my friend Leslie McGahey and I, who did the interview with me, sitting next to me, we did it together. I was in a hotel in Paris, and I was with Peter Brook, and he said, okay, I'm going out to dinner tonight, I'll see you tomorrow. And I said, well, what are you doing? He said, well, actually, I'm having dinner with Orson Welles' manager. I said, oh, wow. And he said, yes, he's an Italian count. He's called Count Tasca. I said, well, look, if you see him, will you tell him that I'd love to meet Orson Welles? And he said, I'd love to do something with him one day. He said, okay, I'll tell him. And then the next morning, I said, did you see him? He said, yes, I did. He said, here, this is the Count's number. You can ring him at this hotel. So I ring him at the hotel, and I say, hello, Peter Brooks said I could talk to you about Orson Welles. He said, hold on a second. So I held on the phone, and then this voice comes on the phone. It was, in fact, Orson Welles. And first of all, I had a small heart attack, really, at that point. And I said, hello, and he said, yes, from the BBC, how are you? And he was very, very friendly. This is for a man who reputationally was incredibly elusive and difficult. And he said, how's Hugh Weldon? Hugh Weldon was a man who sort of did what I do now, sort of ran the BBC as a sort of he was a managing director of the BBC, BBC Television at that time. But he was a creative guy, he did arts programs himself, and he'd interviewed Orson. And then he said, well, what can I do for you? I said, well, I'd love to make a program about you, make a film with you. And before I could finish the sentence, he said, fine. I said, pardon? He said, fine. This is a man who'd hardly been heard in public for the previous 10 years. Then I said, well, I'd like to do a season of films. He said, fine. He said, when do you want to do it? I said, well, when it's okay for you. And he said, fine. And he gave me his phone number. I then went spin on about a month. I went to Los Angeles with Leslie, and Leslie and I were there. We were in this hotel called the Sunset Marquis, and we kept reading stories about how he never turned up for anything. And then the phone would ring, and he would say, Alan, he said, yes. He said, I got a very bad cold. He said, I can't do this for a few days. I said, fine. That's the other thing, always be patient, and then you'll win in the end. So this passed, and then he rings again, and he says, Alan, I can't do it tomorrow. He said, my mother-in-law's got a cold. I said, fine. No problem. And I read even more books about how badly behaved he was. And then he said, okay, fine. He said, come to the Riviera Hotel in Las Vegas, and we'll do the interview at 12 noon. So we went to the hotel. I had actually with me, a lot of the people who were with me were, they all were taking their kind of PhDs in Orson Welles, all these LA guys, they're just so excited they couldn't believe they were going to meet him. So I go to the hotel, and it's actually a casino. I arrive in the casino, go to the front desk, and we go very early to make sure we get in. We arrive at about 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and they take us up to the suite where apparently the interview will take place. Walk in, the room is dark, he opens the curtains, and I follow him in. The curtains are opened, I turn around, and sitting at the bar is Orson Welles. And I can hear the zither music, from playing in the background, that music which is so associated with him in the Carol Reed film. And we set up the cameras, and he's busy teaching magic tricks to the bellboy while we're doing this. And we start the interview, and actually the Oscars are going on at the time, and the interview, I'm going to show you the very beginning of the interview, and this, the only reason I'm showing you is if people say to me, what is the thing you most treasure of all the things you've done, in a funny kind of way, it's the Welles program, even though it was very, very simple. But to capture him, for him to speak so honestly about his life and his career, it was almost like capturing his soul, and it's still a program that many film stars and film directors have seen and asked for, and they all think this is the classic film about a film director. So I'm going to show you just the very opening in which you see just his response to the questions that Leslie actually is asking him in this opening.
My name is Orson Welles. This is a Mercury production.
Episode 8.
Oh my goodness, I never saw that before. All right, you want one? Yeah, that's wonderful. Technology has finally reached the movies. After 40 years of paralysis. Yes.
And he trusted me, and to the extent in those days that this film started off as a sort of 50-minute film, then I would ring him up and say, oh, I don't know, I think it's going to be longer, I think it's going to be, it might be an hour and 10 minutes. He sighed and said, that's fine. And then another week or two would pass in the cutting room, and I'd ring up and say, I'm not sure it's just going to be one program, I think it may have to be two. I think they're both going to be about an hour and a half long. There was another pause, and he would say yes, you know. And finally, of course, that's what happened, and the shows went out. And it's funny because, again, rather like with Mel, Orson Welles and I became very close friends, and whenever he came to Europe, I would be there. And there was one occasion, and we would go out to dinner, and he would usually eat food off my plate. That was the way it would go. And he always expected to see me whenever he was in town. And at one point I was in Kentucky with the Everly Brothers. I made a film, really a film which went out recently because Phil died, with the Everly Brothers, which is, I think, one of the great music films that we made in Kentucky at the time. They just got back together again. I was sitting with Don and Phil in Kentucky, it was a dry town, you weren't allowed alcohol, but we slipped a bit in. Phil and Don were hardly talking to each other. But Don was playing some of his new songs, and Phil was getting more and more irritated. And the phone rang, and the waitress came in, and she said, there's a Mr. Orson Welles on the telephone. So I went to the phone, and it was Orson. And he said, why aren't you here? Where are you? I'm here. And I said, well, I'm not, I'm in Kentucky. He said, what are you doing in Kentucky? I said, I'm with the Everly Brothers, thinking he would know what I was talking about. He said, who are the Everly Brothers? I said, surely you know who the Everly Brothers. He said, any relation to the Everly sisters? I said, who are the Everly sisters? He said, they used to run a brothel in New Orleans. So I came back, and I told Don and Phil the story, and that broke the ice, and they were in a good mood from then onwards. Now, the next clip on this list that I'm going to show you is that I think we're going to come into the present now for a second. I'm very interested in